Thank you very much, everyone, for having me here. Unfortunately, I'm not able to be there in person. My colleague Alessandro absolutely is. So if he's in the room, stick your hand up and say hello. He's available to answer questions as well a little bit later on. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about what we're doing with TEXroad. We have been working on a single version of truth for circular textiles. And this is because in Europe, we consume about 5.4 million tons of clothing and household goods. This is textile-based stuff every year, and more than half of it goes to landfill or incineration. That's a big problem. And also attached to that is the problem that upstream in the value chain, more than a quarter of the resources used to make this stuff is also leaked out. So we have a very significant underutilization of resources if we think about it from a circular economy perspective. Now, this gets more complicated because there's an extreme pressure in our industry to go from linear to circular, but the data and the insights that we need to do that either don't exist, or if they do exist, they're hard to access. Companies see this as their secret information. Or if you're lucky enough to get enough data together, you start to realize that it actually is not comparable. It conflicts with itself. And so this is quite a challenge for us. So the reason that we're developing TEXroad is to create an interoperable digital infrastructure so this data actually starts to flow. And what that looks like in the real world is this. Along the bottom, you see a representation, a basic representation of the textile value chain. And at the bottom, very bottom of that, everything leaks out into landfill or incineration at some point. Even if materials are collected and reused and recycled, it's most often that they don't make more than 1 or 2 cycles before those resources are lost. And we talked a little bit about data earlier this afternoon. Well, there is some data that exists in those gray bubbles in the middle. You'll see different types of digital platforms or digital tools that serve the steps along the value chain. There is data in there, but it's largely siloed. So this information doesn't move very much between different digital systems, and it certainly does not aggregate or create any real usable large pool of information. Now, if you go a step above that to international platforms and standards in our industry or the public sector, the problem is largely the same. Data is siloed. Now, I know very well that there are some good examples in the public sector, such as TEXroad, that show the value and enable data to transfer between one system and another. There's also some examples in our own industry between Open Apparel Registry and the Higg Index where some of this information moves. But again, it's a problem of a large amount of the right types of data around materials, around flows, et cetera, that just isn't available for our purposes today. So what TEXroad starts to do is fix this problem. And we focus on 4 things. The first is what we call the standard language library. Those of you that are more technologically advanced will know this is an ontology or a taxonomy. But essentially what we've done and what we continue to do is map the data models of a range of different digital platforms and tools in our own sector so that we know about, we have a better idea of how they're describing the same types of information. So if data is comparable, we can actually compare it, we can aggregate it, we can analyze it. If it's not comparable, then we can at least intelligently communicate it and transfer it. Now, the transfer of data is something that is a little further down our development timeline, but also critically important. This is API connections, right? This is the ability to be able to exchange data or make accessible data between different digital systems. A really good example of this is if one of our own TEXroad users has materials that have a recycling market, and that recycling customer, recycling buyer is available through one of our partner platforms, then we can open up a connection between TEXroad and one of our digital platform partners and let that data flow. Similarly, thinking even further to the future to, for example, regulatory compliance. If we have users on one of our partner platforms that needs to also submit documentation for regulatory compliance, TEXroad data pipeline can allow the data to flow between a platform partner and the regulatory compliance platform on the public sector side. So that's the whole vision with data pipelines. And then we look at what the information and the data is needed on the public sector and the private sector side. These 2 pieces are largely connected. And this is where the single version of truth piece comes in. We develop, from all the information that we collect, we develop statistics, metrics, and data and insights for the public sector so that they can make good policy, and for the private sector so they can make good business decisions and more circular focused business decisions. And we do this from the same basis of information because, number one, it just doesn't make sense to do it differently. And number two, if public sector is making the right kind of policies, then it actually supports the private sector to move further faster. If these two things are connected, we're going to be in a much better place in terms of the transition to the circular economy. And what we're talking about here is not overly complicated. We collect data from the private sector on the companies themselves, also on products, materials, fiber compositions, and what happens to those materials. Do they become waste? Do they get reused? Do they become recycling feedstock, etc.? We take all this data, we send it through that taxonomy in the interoperability layer, where we can aggregate what's possible to aggregate, we can analyze, we can see what matches exist across our network. And then when we share data and insights and opportunities back to our own users, we send it through the user specification layer. So again, same or similar pool of data, but we can share with the public sector what they need to know, and with the private sector what they need to be able to move forward well. And I'll give you a really specific example of this because that's quite high level. So what we look at is, one of the big things we're looking at in textiles is the EU's separate collection mandate by 2025. This says that certain types of waste have to be collected separately. And textiles is absolutely on that list. Now, if you step back and take a look from a, ooh, what if perspective, that sounds like a really good opportunity for textile to textile recycling to grow. If you get into the details, you see that, like many other things worth doing, it's very complicated. And if you take a step further, or take a step toward the TEXroad perspective, we see four big stakeholders here. The first is the public sector, the first two, at the ministry level and the municipality level. The ministries are required to comply with the separate collection mandate, but the municipalities actually have to organize and carry out the collection. Collectors and sorters have to collect and sort profitably, and recyclers are looking for a very small sliver of a highly complex amount of materials. The public sector lacks good data, they lack guidance, they lack knowledge. The collectors and sorters and the recyclers are looking at, how do I stay profitable, or how do I source materials across a range of sources in small volumes in many, many countries. So what we look at in TEXroad is, what are the materials, where are they, who has them, how much is there, what's currently happening, and what could or should happen. And then you can see down in those two lower boxes how we slice up and serve up that information to the public sector, to the private sector, and get everybody moving further, faster in the same direction. I am really excited and hopeful that this can be successful, because the impact and the benefits, the outcomes are all very, very powerful. And we're looking forward to a bright future in our sector if we can make this all happen. I have a team of 5 incredible people behind me. And again, Alessandra is there today, so please feel free to reach out and say hello. And I look forward to your questions.
How's TEXroad related to digital product information standardization and maybe digital product passes? Do you have an answer for that?
That is a great question, and thanks for it. When it comes to any of the existing data-focused or digital platforms in the textile sector, we don't want to compete. We want to enhance. So digital product passports contain a lot of information about the products themselves, the materials, the origins. What we hope to be able to do, and we're talking to one RFI, or not RFID, but one digital tagging partner, potential partner now. What we want to be able to do is pull the data that's embedded in that in those tags or in those product passports into this larger pool, so that we can give, for example, ministries or even the EU level some idea of what the products in flow look like. We don't replace those types of tools. We enable the data to be made comparable, to be brought together, and to be interpreted for a range of different purposes.
Thank you very much, Traci. An applause, ladies and gentlemen.